Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Chair of the Board of Trustees at GMF, Chris Schroeder, and Distinguished Fellow for Technology and Competitiveness at GMF, Ambassador Karen Kornbluh.
Thank you.
So today we want to share with you the early results of an extraordinary series of interviews that we've been having with leaders in AI. These people, because they're at the forefront of this new revolution, have been able to take us beyond the headlines. So beyond the scaring, this is the end of human life as we know it, or this is going to solve all problems in the next 5 minutes. And what the conversations were able to uncover were really what kind of levers do we need to pull in order to ensure that AI delivers on the public good.
And I want to salute you, Karen, for really making this thing happen, because it's remarkable, and Heather's leadership, of course, and support, because there's nothing like this in any think tank right now. And I just want to salute you and tell you how excited I am, because we really are, among other things, integrating leaders, not just from the Silicon Valley view or the Washington view, but from Europe and abroad, as you're about to see overall. And there are many takeaways, but I think there are three we want to show you right now. The first is that technology obviously offers a huge opportunity, and too often we don't talk about opportunities, so this will be an interesting framework. But there's also a reminder you're about to see that we're not alone. We're not operating in a vacuum with this.
By the way, there's a key point in here, which is if you think about the level of income that you have in your life, there's two ways to get a raise, right? One is I can get the company I work for to pay me more money. The other is everything I buy just got cheaper. It's just this zombie idea that it is increasing inequality as opposed to actually reducing it. It turns out to just be a very hard thing to kill.
On the life science side for making drugs, there are some companies that are using AI to understand biology and really unravel biology, to take that complexity and really to wrap AI around it to be able to say, oh, this is the protein or this is a target that would actually be successful. And then through the whole process of drug design, from the biology to the chemistry of coming up with the drugs themselves, to even running the clinical trials and setting them up, AI will play a role in each one of those. And we're seeing companies working in every one of those areas.
There's going to be AI assistants for medical things because, obviously, if you don't have access to a doctor, you're really helpful. But even if you do, like hey, you've talked to the AI assistant and that says, hey, let's bring up X, Y, and Z to the doctor and have much more time effectiveness in the doctor going, oh, well, given the AI assistant had a 15-minute conversation with you and discovered X, Y, and Z, maybe this is the thing that we should really do versus how you doing? How you doing? You have a headache? Kind of as a way of operating.
One of the great themes, of course, that all of us have been talking about and the GMF is very committed to is the intersectionality between business, policy, politics, and technology. And you will hear in some of these things, as you can imagine, that some of the inventors are wary of that intersection and they're wary a little bit about regulation, but they realize there is an enormous role for government to play.
For better or for worse, we do not have a national technology strategy, right? And by the way, there's a lot of good in not having a national technology strategy, which is, we believe free markets, are still important. It's not like we want the government to control everything, but the fact is we have no national technology strategy, certainly no national AI strategy. Look, China is the other player, and then of course China has the strengths and weaknesses they have, which is the strength they have is they do have a national policy. They have a very aggressive and clearly stated national policy to win in technology and to win in AI. They have a very clear and articulated view of what that means for inside China as well as globally. They're going to take their AI technology and philosophy and approach.
What we have observed with the EU AI Act in particular is that the focus was set on the underlying technology. So the general purpose models that we're building are by design able to do any kind of application. So we should think about them as the new programming languages. And in that respect, regulating those and asking for a very high compliance level for such a technology, which is neutral by nature because you can build arbitrary systems with it, is very hard for us. Is hard to implement, and in that respect, it creates, regulating too fast creates some friction on a technology which is fundamentally neutral.
The US is increasingly now starting to rethink those techno-libertarian commitments. And it's starting to move closer to the EU's rights-driven regulatory model. So I think the conversation is shifting in the US. Public opinion is shifting. The Americans no longer trust the tech companies the same way. They want more regulation. We see our Congress that doesn't really agree on anything, agree on two things. So one is that China is a problem, and the second that the big tech is a problem.
So one of the things that we started to focus in on, as Chris was saying, we were looking at the opportunities, people were talking about what's the role of government, and the thing that people really honed in on, and we honed in on with them, was especially where government has a role to play in ensuring that healthcare, resilience of the chip supply chain, and election integrity really benefited from AI and were not undermined.
Can promote innovation, we'll see innovators come into the space. And when the regulatory environment stifles innovation, we can have some real challenges. And I think only through having these deep conversations and really getting to know what each side is doing, where I think we'll be able to really move forward. And it's never about zero regulation. It's about the right regulation.
I think the U.S. government has done a really good job of helping turn new ideas into a first product and then handing it off to the private sector to turn it into a product that ends up in all of our pockets. And so that government to private sector handoff, I think, is really critical to focus on.
The other question would be, okay, then how do we augment both law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies to do a better job detecting and offsetting these kinds of threats? And how do we use these new technologies to do that? And so, you may, as an example, you may know, like we're very involved now in law enforcement related technologies, and it turns out, you can steal things like license plate recognition and facial recognition, all kinds of things to, actually solve crimes, right? And so, all of a sudden you want to, arm up. If you're in favor of solving crimes, you want, law enforcement agencies to be able to use these new technologies to be able to do that, and then the same thing globally with the intelligence services.
Artificial intelligence is a human amplifier. Bad human amplifier is also what it can be. So how do we say, well, we make sure that it's in the good human amplification, things like, like a medical assistant, and how do we minimize bad human amplifier, terrorist, criminal, rogue state? And that's essentially where risks to navigate the limitation or containment of is particularly important.
So we can't wait to continue these conversations and bring them to the transatlantic community. We're going to open it up to some questions. We don't have time for very many. So if you could give us your name, your organization, and a very quick question that ends in a question mark. But just so you know, this is just part one. We're really excited about doing a bunch more of these interviews, and they're going up. You'll be able to get them from the GMF website, and we'll be doing some takeaways in text as well, very old-fashioned. And we look forward to having an ongoing conversation. But just as part one, does anyone have any questions now?
Mine.
Yes, please.
Okay, microphone. Teresa Fallon, Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. Since we are in Brussels, I think we should I would be curious to know what your views are on the AI Act and how that might affect transatlantic relations. And Europe has a very different approach to regulation compared to the US. So how do you see it going forward? Thanks.
Take the first.
Yeah, so it's obviously really early on in the AI Act. But I think one of the things that we're hoping to do is, there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction, I think, among some people in the tech industry that all regulation is bad, and that Europe just wants to regulate, it doesn't want to innovate. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to do that interview with Arthur Mensch of Mistral in France was to let him talk about what innovation is like in Europe and what he's trying to do and how he sees the need for some regulation. And we also were speaking to Anna Bradford, who's written a book about the different models, American, European, and Chinese, for approaching regulation so that she could, again, get beyond those headlines and dichotomies to start to talk about what each side can learn from the other and how we do things in a more sensible way. I think one of the interesting, for me personally, if you're asking about what I think of the AI Act, I mean, I think some of the interesting things about it are looking at the uses of AI. But I think it's very hard to be regulating now when it's so early on in the process. And so I'm glad that it's more about the end result and the uses than the technology itself. But I still think it's going to be a really iterative learning process, and I hope that it's not so written in stone that it can't change over time. And that's one of the reasons I'm really intrigued by the American executive order that President Biden has put in place, because that is so specific to specific issues and problems under existing law where AI could pose a challenge. But I think it'll be fascinating to see how they both develop, and hopefully we can keep in conversation, learning from each other and updating.
If there's a theme to GMF, and it's never more essential than it is in AI, except for maybe what we've been dealing with in Ukraine, it's co-authorship. I have no problem that Europe's I thought they stepped out too quickly. I could have many problems in it. I have problems with President Biden's executive order. But the idea that things are out there and we're having conversation is the watchword of where we go from here. These are early days.
Anyone else? Come on.
My name's
The brave women are going first, yes.
I'm part of the Master of Transatlantic Affairs at the College of Europe in Bruges and Fletcher School of Diplomacy in Boston. I wanted to ask to what extent the EU-US Trade and Technology Council has been successful in navigating these regulatory differences. Thank you.
Do you want to say anything? So we're going to have a panel on competitiveness next, so we can get to some of these things. I think, GMF had a task force before the Biden administration took office, urging that there be much more work together to bridge some of these differences. And certainly the conversations have been incredibly important, especially when Europe felt surprised by the Inflation Reduction Act and the subsidies for clean energy, that it was very, very useful to have this forum where the principals could get together. But I think we've seen that a lot more needs to be done. And GMF was very fortunate to have the opportunity to organize a transatlantic tech exchange where we had legislator to legislator interactions. And we found that was a nice supplement to executive branch to executive branch. And then Sudha David Whip is here. She's been having conversations around Europe about European competitiveness, and we're trying to bring some of those conversations together across the Atlantic. So I think the TTC has been an important step, but it feels like there's a lot more that needs to be done, especially when there's a lot of the traditional multilateral avenues like the WTO are not proving to be, necessarily the right place to work some of these things out.
Co-authorship, by definition, means we don't all agree. And one of the most important things is we're open and candid and talk about the things where we disagree and put them on the table, because I think in part of that we'll discover that we actually agree on a tremendous amount. And this vehicle, I think, can be a very powerful one for that.
One more? Yes.
Hi, Amelia Powers Gardner, County Commissioner in Utah County, USA. My question is on the underlying infrastructure. Have you had a lot of discussions about the sustainability and the fact that AI takes an immense amount of computing power, and data centers oftentimes get a bad rap in that area? And how do we balance not pushing that innovation to areas that don't regulate this, but also recognizing that those data centers are a necessary part of this innovation?
Yeah, Chris, you get to go first on this one.
First of all, I thought you were wonderful earlier. So thank you for that. In a way, you've asked two questions. One is, how does this get allocated to things where earlier or easier? And I think one of the lessons, whether it's within the United States or even more broadly, we all should take note as we think about regulation that there will be a gravitational force to the places that are open to innovation and that actually want people to succeed and are willing to do it in an affordable, easy way. At one level, you can say, well, that should be stopped, but the reality is it won't be stopped because there will be so many opportunities. So it has to be part of the discussion, and it has to be thought about very explicitly as we think about things like infrastructure and what are the things that we value so that we can be competitive, not only within the country or within the transatlantic relationship, but vis-a-vis people who are being very aggressive on infrastructure that we'll be talking about 2 panels now in China. So I think that's the thing that's very important about it overall. In terms of the energy side of it, one of the things which is very hard to calculate, but is very often not in the conversation, is that the very capacities and capabilities that are being developed by AI will actually embed in it unbelievable amounts of efficiencies. And this isn't just me talking as a venture capitalist or one who tends to speak to people like this. I just had lunch with a head of a major oil and gas company, and he said no one talks about what he refers to as the pig and the python, the timing going forward. He said, we know right now, we actually have a line of sight on how many technologies, of which AI is one, will have actually ability to create greater efficiencies, for example, in the electricity grid. And all of a sudden, the assumption isn't just we have this much energy now because of AI and other computing technologies or company that goes like this. That's not the way to look at it. The way to look at it is that there will be efficiencies that come with this technology that are knowable. It's not an abstraction, but it's something that needs to be part of the conversation. Over here as well.
We have a brave man.
Yes, hello, my name is Igor. I'm Ukrainian journalist, Detector Media. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. How do you see the impact of AI on the future of warfare?
You want to take the first?
I'm going to let you go first.
Very, very big. You don't have swarm warfare without AI. Now remember, definitionally speaking, okay? AI has been with us for many, many years. There's AI in the structural sense that you're asking. And a lot of new tech companies like Anduril are completely AI companies. Like they are thinking about making weapons whose delivery and management and how they fly is through AI. Generative AI is really about creating content on the fly. And a lot of this we'll have to see how that plays over time. But the two immediate ones that we will see, one is the power of AI writ large and what it can deliver in this new war that we're in right now, as in drones and swarming, which is in process right now, but still in its relative infancy. And the second one, which is more of the generative AI side, is I believe both in our elections, but also in a national security, military sense, we're going to be managing a level of fake news that we talk about in an abstractive sense, which will be completely without premise. I've seen things that are coming right now in video that's being rendered by AI, which you cannot tell. It could be me, it could be you, it could be something else. We will not know. These are the two most immediate things that are coming, and the reminder is that these are the earliest days.
And the third one that I'd throw in is, which is very related, is just intelligence. So when you think about the fog of war, to the extent that AI is very sophisticated statistics, it's gathering the data and it's able to process it, and maybe just a little faster if you're able to have that intelligence. And so I think in the competitiveness debate, the issue that's sort of underneath it all is this national security issue and this need that the U.S. feels and Europe feels definitely. And we're talking at a time when there's a competitiveness summit happening in Europe right now. So there's this need for jobs, but I think there's also a need to stay ahead because of these national security implications.
Adding one more to tie to your question about the efficiencies, I've seen weapon systems that are being developed right now that can be very, very powerful for us in the transatlantic relationship, done by companies like Anduril, which not only do amazing things because of the technology, they do them at a fraction of the cost. So we don't talk enough about the power of the efficiencies that are created in these capabilities, which will be extremely important. And if we don't do it right, our adversaries will.
It's right here.
Thank you. My name is Bernhard Stroop, Robert Bosch Foundation. Earlier waves of technology changed and redefined what we can do. I hear that AI is going to redefine who we are. What's your take on this, whether the doing versus the being aspect of this new technological wave?
I'll just confess to my prejudice about this, which is, I think we've had a lot of technology. I remember when I started out in my career, I was an economic forecaster, and we had to plot, graphs by hand, use a ruler, and that all got automated, and it didn't change my sense of I guess it did change my sense of who I was, and that I wasn't a plotter anymore. I was more of a thinker, but not in any fundamental way. And so my hope is that we have that kind of evolution, that it's like when we went from, writing by quill to writing by pen to using the typewriter to using the computer, that we just become more the thinkers as opposed to the mechanical devices. But I think it remains to be seen, and I think a lot of people would certainly argue that social media already, which uses a form of AI, it certainly uses algorithms, that has certainly changed the way we interact, not only in the election sense, in the democracy sense, but just interpersonally. And to that extent, I think it has changed our, maybe our senses of selves in relation to others. But my hope is that we keep very much our humanity. And somebody said something very interesting, like, I don't want the AI to do the art and the philosophy while I shovel the snow and cook the dinner. I want the AI to shovel the snow and cook the dinner so that I can do art and philosophy. And I hope that's where we'll wind up.
I think you're asking actually one of the most important questions that can be asked about this, and it requires deliberation and thought and lengthy discussion, which, shall we say, is not necessarily the environment, at least in America, that we're in to satisfy it. But I must say I come very much in your light. I asked, not in this interview, but I asked Reed in a different interview, should anyone be getting a computer science degree anymore? He said, oh yeah, of course, now there are these reasons to do it, and I think he's probably right. But a few minutes later, he came back to me and said, I do want to check that and say this, that do you know what the next tech language is? Can you guess what the next computer science, computer language will be? It's going to be English or German or French. I mean, my father is going to be able to program within a year by merely talking the technology and creating it. And so that opens up a series of opportunities that then goes in a way to your question. Because at least for now, and I have no lens 2 years from now, at least from now, these capacities are our co-pilots, our co-advisors. And to think that all of a sudden that we have something that can understand many things that open up our brains and creativity that we could not open before is part of it now. But we need to have this kind of conversation because there are no guarantees over it over time. My daughter took math classes at college and regrets it because what she really loved was medieval history, which is what she ended up focusing on. And I think she may be more hireable in 3 years than I am. We'll have to see. Behind me?
Yeah, right there.
Sorry, thank you very much for some very interesting words. You said that computer science just now you think is something that might not be important.
I don't think that.
Sorry?
I don't. I think it'll be different, but not.
It'll be
not
different. Yeah, I was going to say, what is your perspective on almost a requirement to have computational thinking, or the process of thinking as computers do as individuals? It's something that people like Stephen Wolf from Caltech have been a proponent of, and it's something that I think personally is a very important aspect within the educational sector.
I agreed with him then, and I'd be curious. It'd be interesting to hear what he says now as generative AI has come out. But I think that to me, it's an element and not a thing. To me, the thing that goes across sectors and everything else is critical thinking. Critical thinking. Can I ask a question safely? And can I be pushed back? And can I be wrong? And can I embrace and have wonder in being wrong and keep coming at it and over again? The processing that you're describing should be a component of that because of where we are and where we're going. Should have been that way for 10 years. But the other skills that we're talking about, and certainly the one that he's alluding to, I think are part and parcel, are legs of a stool that all fall under the table of critical thinking.
But I do think it's going to be really important to be able to query these systems and to understand a little bit about, when you ask a question, how is it developing the answer to give back to you? And what I imagine is that there will be middlemen that will actually help you do that there'll be tools that will help you check, what it is that you're getting.
GPT-7.
GPT-7, exactly. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Vero from Georgia, from Forset. So one of the concerns I always have about AI, and I had about social media and social media's success in the role in everything in politics, also is the ethics part of it. How do we incorporate gender equality and equality in general in this conversation when we talk about safety, and where does it stand in these priority lists we have?
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that. It's been really overlooked a little bit too much, and there's a big discussion happening right now. You see a big use of the deep fakes being non-consensual porn, which are a terrible violation of people's privacy and human rights. So a lot more needs to be done. We need to have a lot more women at the table making decisions, designing these systems. Absolutely. And so I think it's a big priority, and we can't, we just have to be really careful. And there's a robust debate about this, about not taking the biases of the past into the future. And so I think every new technology is an opportunity to rethink and to make sure that we're operating on a different basis. And if we don't think about it, we'll just take those biases into the future. If we do think about it, we take advantage of the opportunity. But I think, right now there's a really robust conversation happening about it, and it has to happen, and we have to take serious action. And I think one of the things that's really important is we have a lot of existing protections, existing laws, existing rights. And we need the public sector and the NGO sector have to become sophisticated enough about these new technologies so they can apply a lot of the old laws, the old rules, the old rights in the new environment without necessarily inventing new ones. But if we're not careful, we won't even enforce the old ones because people will be too shy about using them, or they won't be sophisticated enough to use them. So an example is on social media, voter falsifying information and tricking voters and suppressing their vote is illegal in the U.S. But it wasn't really enforced on social media because people were, just not aware of it or confused about it, or the enforcers weren't seeing it. So those kinds of things I think we need to be very, very clear-eyed about.
There's an interesting duality, just to wrap it, because at one level, some of the people you'll hear in these interviews will say that there's plenty of regulation, we don't need regulation, we could put it in, but they speak a little bit out of two sides of their mouths because they say this is a new technology. And you had a wonderful breakfast where we were talking about how do we all collectively think about regulation, not about treating something as if it's in the past, but there is something new here that we need to have the robust conversations about that, in fact, are also new regulation. And one of the questions I tweak my friends in Washington with a lot is, let's pretend, just as a thought exercise, let's pretend AI came first. All the other stuff we've assumed comes second. And it opens your brain. It starts helping you to ask questions and start saying, there are things here which really can help unleash. There are things which really are new concerns and don't fit here. But by the way, there's a boatload that exists that we should be able to leverage. But it takes thoughtful conversation and deliberation, of course.
So I just want to thank Chris and also our new board member, Margit Windmakers, because we wouldn't have been able to have these conversations without their guidance and cheerleading and insights and introductions. And we want to keep them happening, and we want to stay in dialogue with all of you. These are not meant to provide answers. They're really just meant to spark exactly this kind of conversation.
Well done. Congratulations. And thank you all, because this is for you. Thank you. I'll see you now.